of crime.
John Roskam from the Institute of Public Affairs and former Labor campaign guru, mastermind, Bruce Hawker. Bruce, what did you make of Pauline Hanson's message? It seems less dynamite, less shocking this time than the equivalent message that time about Asians did 20 years ago.
Yeah, I guess she got us used to the idea of vilifying people under parliamentary privilege. Look, I think we've got about as much chance of being overrun by Muslims as you have of becoming a member of the Communist Party, Andrew. It's not going to happen. They represent 2.2% of the Australian population. And you could take those statistics and apply them to any number of groups in the community. It could be, it's just selective use of statistics to try to scare people. Look, there's no doubt, of course, that there are some people, jihadists, who are appalling and should be driven into cells and out of the country. But the overwhelming majority of Muslim Australians aren't like that. Never have been, never will be.
You know, the first thing about Bruce's response that struck me, John, that she could say this under parliamentary privilege, which goes to the free speech. She is saying what a lot of people are too scared to say for fear of being sued.
And of course, Andrew, one of the reasons why the Prime Minister said we can't have freedom of speech and can't reform Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act is because of the concern in the Muslim community. Look, I think there's far more fundamental things that Pauline Hanson spoke about. She spoke about cohesion. She spoke about a unified Australia. She spoke about Australians coming together around our culture. I think what she said is right. There are many things that she said that I disagree with, but her essential argument, which is we will welcome you to Australia, but be part of Australia, abide by our laws and be part of our culture. And that is a really key point that I don't think should get lost in this debate about mosques or burqas or anything else.
But Bruce, you know, coming back to it, look, you're right to say terrorism is a problem, and she mentioned that. She mentioned, which is also true, the high rates of imprisonment, the fact that Sydney's got a Middle Eastern crime unit in the police. Then there's the high rate of people on social security of the Muslim faith. Isn't her broader point that Muslim immigration has not been an unalloyed joy and has been a threat to cohesion? Isn't that at least true? And shouldn't we at least have a debate about that?
Well, you can always have debates about these things, and they should be civilised and informed. I mean, 40 years ago, everyone was running around scared of the Baader-Meinhof gang and Irish terrorists and other groups. You know, they were out there causing problems. Now you do have these characters who are doing appalling things right across the globe.
You're not seriously likening the Islamic threat here to the Baader-Meinhof gang in Germany or to the IRA in Ireland?
Well, if you lived in London in the 1970s...
We don't. We live here.
You would have been very nervous about what the IRA was doing.
But we live here.
But I'm making a point that, you know, terrorism is something which does pervade modern society, but it has, you know, for a long, long time. It's just that different groups get involved. Now, I'm not saying for a second that there isn't a serious threat with those groups. There is, but I don't think you should take it to the next step and say, you know, all Muslims are a necessary problem and that they have to be enculturated absolutely into Australian society. What we have to do is recognise that they've got their way of looking at things and we have ours, but we have to have mutual respect. And when that's missing, then you get problems and you get these kids who are alienated and start deciding they're going to go off to the mosque and before long they're off in Syria doing terrible things or, you know, or outside a police station doing terrible things. I don't think you solve these problems by vilifying people or by pointing the finger at them and saying they're terrible and different. They're not all that much different
I don't think she said that, John. Bruce said, show respect for other people, and I agree with him. Show respect for Muslims, people. Right?
Show respect for all people.
But that doesn't necessarily mean you have to show respect for the ideology that they follow.
And I wouldn't agree with Bruce on this regard. You don't respect intolerance. You don't tolerate the intolerance. We can absolutely respect people's differences, but within a single framework of respect for genders, respect for sexualities, respect for our religion. And to come back to the point that Pauline Hanson was making, we have a single culture, we have a strong culture, we have a free culture. We have people freeing the Middle East, not to go to other countries like those in the Middle East, to come to free countries. And that free country such as Australia, those free countries, is framed by values of tolerance, freedom of religion, and as Mark Latham said earlier on, Western civilisation. Of
which you've got a program that you're going to have to crank into third gear. But Bruce, can I just ask, just looking as a political strategist though, how is this speech going to play?
Oh, I think it will excite certain people who already are excited by the idea that, you know, all Muslims represent a threat to Australian culture. You know, I don't disagree with John on that question about mutual respect. I made that point before. It has to be based on mutual respect, and that's one of the problems when you have people in Islamic society, but also in some Christian groups and Buddhists and Hindus and others who are extremely intolerant of other cultures and other points of view. You have to respect other points of view in a society like ours. Otherwise, you run a real risk of undermining it. But that's why we have security.
How do you think it's going to play with, you know, is it going to win her more support, or is the media now going to pile on and going to kill her, drown her out? Or what's going to happen?
No, I think the same old, you know, review will take place as it always does. You know, she was brave to come out and say those things, and others will say, you know, she was appalling and all she's doing is winding up people who already are scared to go out at night or of their own shadows, you know. And I think that's the worry about people like Pauline Hanson. All they're really doing is exciting their base and then getting everybody worked up again into a cycle of claim and counterclaim. You know.
No, well, is Bruce right there, John? Is she just winding up her base, or is she going to wind up part of the Liberal and National base?
Well, it's not just the Liberal National base. 600,000 Australians gave One Nation their first preference vote in the Senate. The issue of Pauline Hanson, regardless of whether she's right or wrong, is she is speaking to people's fears and concerns. John Howard dealt with that 20 years ago. Compared to what happens today, the Greens walk out on her. If we ignore the concerns that she is expressing, not just in relation to migration, but into many aspects of our culture, we are only going to get more people voting for One Nation, whether they're Labor, Greens voters,
I think you're right.
voters.
I think just mainstreaming. Bruce, I must say this.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I must say this. There was one difference between this speech and the one 20 years ago. This one was delivered with some humour, jibes at Darren Hinch and all that. People laughed. The Liberal Party did not walk out on her. There were even Labor Party members that shook her hand afterwards. This is different.
Well, I think it is, and the reason for that is to take John's point from before about John Howard. I mean, Howard disendorsed her as the Liberal candidate for the seat of Oxley in 1996 because he was so terrified about what she was saying, what the public reaction would be, and then, of course, she won the seat. And Howard then had to mainstream a lot of the values that she was espousing in order to reclaim those people who had previously been National and Liberal Party supporters who were moving off to One Nation. I worked on campaigns around that back in the 90s.
You're quite right. I'm sorry to cut you off, Bruce, but we've got to go. John Roskam, Bruce Hawker, thank you so much for your time. Stick around.